Mother of a footballer who was stabbed to death on a nightclub dance floor thinks that those carrying knives must face tougher sentences. Cody Fisher was murdered on the dance floor at Crane nightclub in Digbeth on Boxing Day 2022. His killers have been sentenced to life in jail, but his mother fears that that won't act as a deterrent. Now that's as a murder investigation is launched into the stabbing of yet another young victim, a 15-year-old boy killed outside a shopping centre in West Bromwich. So should those carrying knives be instantly jailed? Get your calls in for this one now. Nick, what do you think?
I think they should be instantly jailed. At the moment, there is an immediate custodial sentence if you use a knife to threaten someone. In my view, I would make sure that if you carry a knife at all, irrespective of your intention, obviously if it's illegal, then you face an immediate custodial sentence. We should have zero tolerance. We need to get the knives off the streets. We're hearing about these tragedies every week. And if I said to you that since 2019, knife crime has actually fallen by 5%, the reality is that if you're a teenager now living in this country, you're twice as likely to be murdered as you were 10 years ago by a knife. So there is a serious problem within a certain demographic, a certain age group. There are all sorts of solutions. I think it starts at home. I think, parents, whether they be single or whatever, they need to work with their children and make sure they're not carrying weapons. That's where it starts. We then have schools, but ultimately we need zero tolerance. And there's no excuse. You have a knife in a public place and it's illegal, you go to prison. And that is going to be, that will prove a deterrent, and it will make these people think that it's not okay. And I know they say, look, I need a knife because I need to protect myself. It's a little bit like nuclear disarmament. If we remove them all, then they're not going to have that fear that someone's going to have a knife and I'm not. So zero tolerance. It needs to be a collective approach with education and the law working together. And there have been lots of really good projects. And can I just say, the government have now banned zombie knives, zombie-like knives, cyclone knives. They're moving massively to solving this problem. But the one area they haven't touched is possession, and that needs to be immediate custody in the same way that a threat to use a knife is now immediate custody.
I think the thing that we can all agree on in this conversation is that we want to bring an end to knife crime. But jailing someone for possession, our jails are already full.
I was going to say, it's completely unrealistic. Male jails are 99.7% full, female jails 96.9%, and the average for a serious criminal offence to reach a conclusion is between 2 and 3 years at the moment. So you're going to put, thousands of youths who are just in possession. That isn't realistic to implement. I obviously, like you, want it to be stamped out, want it to not exist. You read about this young life and it's horrendous. But the other problem, and really interesting, the stat that you gave about kids more likely to be killed than 10 years ago. And this is the problem. 10 years ago is when austerity really bit, and all those support services that you need at grassroots levels have been, they can't afford them. We're going to talk about councils later. Huge part of it. You've got no vital youth services. You haven't got mental health support. You haven't got addiction support anymore. You've got boxing. All the things that we had before have gone because councils have had their budgets slashed to pieces. And a lot of those, there was 2 musicians who recently won the Mercury Music Prize, and they spoke of how they met at a youth centre 10 years ago, and they had been on the point of getting into crime, and they were stopped. They had intervention from fantastic people who cared, who motivated them, who gave them a reason to sort of do other things and find their talent. Well,
it is an interesting way of looking at it. I know Glasgow certainly took a very different approach to knife crime with fairly good results as well, and treating it more like a social issue rather than a criminal issue, or just a criminal issue. Do get your calls in for this. We'd love to hear your views. 0207 862 2222. Get calling while I bring in former Met Police Superintendent and author of Closing Ranks, My Life as a Cop. This is Dr. Leroy Logan. Leroy, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. Why are so many young people, I was about to say young men, it does feel like it is mostly young men, but why are so many young people carrying knives now?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Unfortunately, knife crime culture is not an overnight phenomenon. It's been building since the late 90s. It's been the weapon of choice for a number of years. And unfortunately, it's been accelerated by social media and the sort of accessibility of these zombie knives and other sort of horrendous weapons. And as a result of that, they've hijacked the culture on such an exponential scale. And so normal sort of or reasonable people are now seeing, well, it's cool to carry these things. And so there is definitely a need for strong enforcement, definitely, but the education piece is just as important. So it has to be a combination. It's a massive scale. It's not going to happen overnight. But unfortunately, the knife crime culture is seen to be pretty cool in certain areas in our towns and cities. And just lastly, I went up to Glasgow and did a lot of work with the Violence Reduction Unit up there, and it helped a youth violence commission I was doing in the mid to late teens. And I must admit, it's not just around enforcement, it's around education, it's around reducing exclusions, it's around mentoring on a major scale to ensure that young people have support and can manage their difference without resorting to violence.
And do you think that that would work if it was implemented across the UK then?
Well, we've seen VRUs implemented in London in 2018 after our interim report in the Youth Violence Commission, and also elsewhere in different towns and cities. But it depends around the number of assets you give them, the sustainable funding. You give them independence. So, because a lot of the VRUs, especially one in Glasgow, had to challenge Holyroyd and a police constable or a police Scotland to say, listen, your tactics are actually making it worse. And so, there was that bespoke approach around education and enforcement. So we're starting to see a reduction. But the issue is around how social media has accelerated this knife crime culture and how it's cool to carry a knife and not cool to go to school. Well, and of course, the accessibility piece, that needs to be significantly reduced.
I had no idea about the influence actually of social media when it came to knife crime. I can't believe people are being so brazen about it and glorifying it.
It's another reason why they have to go after those tech giants and get their cooperation.
Well, I hear that there is merit for attacking it, probably the wrong word, but on all sides, where we deal with the social issues, we deal with the education, but we also deal with the punitive element. So when we're talking about this, Leroy, in terms of jailing people just for carrying, for carrying a weapon like a knife, do you think that would be a good way to go too?
Well, I think it has to be adjusted according to the circumstances. I know some people are foolhardy and carry knives for other people, not necessarily to say they're going to stab someone, but just say, listen, take care of this for me. Especially the younger teens, they carry all sorts of weapons for the older ones. And that is more of an education thing. Don't get into that because it can result in major crimes, maybe months or years later. And then the other point that's already been raised is the prisons are full almost to capacity, and you're going to be having a significant number of people that's going to be arrested, put before the courts, and even there's a logjam in the courts, even on the criminal side, much less the civil side. So there needs to be a diversion scheme, I would suggest, just like we had a massive influx of drug offences. There was diversion schemes that helped people to understand the importance of getting out of that culture, that knife crime culture, and understanding where it can end up. So I think a diversion scheme is a good process to assist the prison service as well as the enforcement in policing, etc.
Okay, Leroy, stay with us. I just want to take a couple of calls on this. Lucy from London. I mean, London has a huge problem with knife crime. How do you feel about the thought of people just being sent straight to jail if they're caught in possession of a knife?
For me, like I say, my son was recently attacked and his laptop was taken away. He's an autistic child. There should be a reform. Freezing, we've known over the years, people have gone in, come out and still reoffend. we do not have a system in place to help to reform criminal or people that are involved in knife crime. Like the police inspector has said now, that we need to put prevention. There is no prevention program, training workshop for young people to get into crime. This starts at the age of children in primary school, year 6, before they even transition to secondary school. We've seen cases of young people carrying knives. What education are they put in place? What support are they giving community? When you see something like this happening, what should the community do? There's no form of a set program, set project. The government has no strategy. There's a lot of community people that are doing a lot of groundwork. We need to get the community involved to support young people, to support the community, support those also involved, so that we can find a lasting solution.
Lucy, can I pause you there, just because you've touched on a huge amount of points that I want to get into in a little bit more depth. First of all, I think you said at the beginning that your son was, well, I suppose, mugged under knife point for his laptop. Is that right?
Yes.
So wouldn't you like to see that person, that criminal that took the laptop from your son, put in prison?
I would like to see the person being jailed, being taken to prison. But when he gets to prison, I want to see a reform. I want to see a reform in that person's life, not just going to prison to punish the person, but also educate the person what the result of what that will cost to whoever he has done that to. So it's not just sending the person to prison. You understand? It's also helping that person to become a better person.
It's looking at it from the punitive and the rehabilitation side, because what's the point in letting them out and they're just going to commit the same crime?
Also in the imaginary prisons that they'd have to build.
Well, hang about. Do we not need to prioritise? It's no point saying that we've got no prison places when we need to be prioritising violent criminals.
Absolutely.
Rather than people who shoplift and commit relatively...
You've got rapists who are waiting on trial, and holding a knife, if you're a 15-year-old kid who's an idiot and needs to be told and needs to be learned.
Why do we need to tell people, actually, it's really serious to carry a knife that can kill someone? Isn't it quite obvious?
No, because they've all got such pressure coming from,
social media?
Gangs and where
obvious.
They live. And of course I know it's ridiculously stupid, but I'm just saying when you've got people who really have committed violence, that needs to be prioritised over a child that hasn't done anything yet.
But carrying a knife in a public place is basically violence in waiting.
But Nick, how do you deal with children? We're talking about primary school age, carrying a knife.
Before then. You start with your parents. You start with your mum and your dad.
Yes, but what's happening now is we get very young people potentially carrying knives, could be caught for it, and then what, they've got a criminal record?
Well, that's going to start. If they're under the age of criminality, then clearly not. But once they reach the age of criminality, look, I'm not suggesting...
Which is what?
It's 10.
10, so they're 11, they're carrying a knife, they get done, they've got a criminal record for the rest of their life, they're trying to get into uni, they're trying to get jobs, and they have this following them.
Do you not think that if an 11-year goes out with a knife, his mum is going to make sure, his dad is going to make sure, before you go anywhere, you don't have a knife with you? Isn't that, you start at home when they're young, so they know.
My son definitely doesn't carry a knife, he's like a little gentle thing. But if he wanted to, the idea that I could 100% police that is for the birds.
Well, look, if he takes a knife out, supposing he does take a knife out and he's 11...
Which, by the way, he absolutely
and he threatens
doesn't.
someone, it's a minimum mandatory sentence. So it's not a quantum leap for possession to threatening someone, is it? We're almost there. And what I think we should do in terms of prison is we need to let out people who shouldn't be there and prioritise violent offenders. And violent offenders, in my view, are people who carry knives.
11-year-olds with knives?
Well, potentially, yes.
Okay. It's a perfectly valid argument.
I know it sounds
want to
extreme,
get to more calls.
but I suggest most of these people aren't 11-year-olds.
But you've got 238 spaces in Britain in male prisons.
Well,
OK, I just want to get to the calls. Lucy, thank you very much for your call. Eddie from Glasgow. Oh, Glasgow, great. What's your view on just straight to jail if you get caught carrying a knife?
Oh, definitely. I think things need to change. Storm, is this your real name, Storm?
It is, yeah. Talk about going off topic, but it certainly is. I was born on a stormy night. I'm named after a character in a book. It's a long story. It's online. You can find it.
Right, OK then. I'll phone you later. You know, the main thing is, yes, they should be jailed for it. Because if you're carrying a knife, you've only got one intention. And you can say defending, but generally attacking. But what I'd like to get across to yourself, Storm, and the guys on the panel, is the amount of media violence on the TV and films. You can't even watch Coronation Street without them wanting to have a fight. You look at American films, they're blowing each other up, stabbing each other. The kids are playing games that they think a gun, it's nothing.
It's
they don't
really
understand
interesting.
the consequences.
I actually started watching a show the other night, A Three-Body Problem or something on Netflix. Anyway, the start of it is gratuitously violent to the point where I thought, I'm going to have to switch this off because it just really affected me. Leroy, do you think that's part of the problem as well, actually? We're just showing too much violence, glorifying too much violence on telly, or is the problem much more rooted in the community?
Well, no, I think it's a combination of all of that, because social media, TV, it's 24/7 now. And unfortunately, it does glorify thug life, a lot of things. But these are just cofactors. They're not actually going to cause, say, go and stab someone. They may glorify it and sensitize them to the possibility. But it isn't a factor. A lot of these factors are around education. A lot of it should be in the home. Unfortunately, peer pressure is stronger than parental pressure now, especially with social media. And so when there used to be feuds and disputes, it would be confined to a small area. Your parents could get involved in another community. Now it's on social media, it's on a massive scale, and people are into this disrespect culture that ties into managing their conflict by striking first and not managing the conflict by reasonable means. So it is massive, that I think the tech giants really need to start looking at media. All this glorification of violence on media needs to reduce. But also there's other factors around when people get juiced up through alcohol and drugs. They look for a weapon, and these sort of things. It's an education piece. It's really people understanding, listen, you can have your differences, but it doesn't mean you pull a knife, or just like the young footballer who was, just over a small issue.
Cody Fisher.
These guys was hunting him down for 2 days, secreted a zombie knife into this club and killed him in front of his girlfriend, and he died in his girlfriend's arms. That sort of thing. That's a mindset that's been set. And it's sensitized through social media and other peer pressure, which parents can't really understand. And that's why I've been dealing with a charity called Void Youth around the early intervention and prevention programs, but also we do rehabilitation piece, which is really important.
Thank you very much, Leroy. Eddie, thank you for your call as well and bringing that up. Michael from London, what's your thoughts? Jail somebody immediately if they get caught carrying a knife?
Yeah, well, I'm an ex-magistrate. I'm a retired magistrate, and in the 80s they introduced a policy that anybody caught with a knife would go to prison for 12 months.
Okay.
Now it was just beginning for the knife culture to be coming in at that time, and it was always involved with postcode gangs and their tags, and it moved from physical fistfights to carrying a knife. And the idea was, we'll nip it in the bud, we'll put the first couple of hundred into jail, and the rest of them will be thinking about it.
What was the impact?
Now it was at 12 months, but magistrates couldn't do that because their powers were only 6 months, so they had to send them to the Crown Court for sentence.
Okay.
When they got to the Crown Court judges thought, well, the jails are all going to be full, so they didn't follow through. And the thing fell apart because the judiciary weren't willing to do what the government at the time wanted to do.
That's interesting, Michael. That's going down the view that actually what we're seeing is potentially an increase in knife crime, because the law can't be strong enough on it because we don't have enough places in our prisons.
That's the biggest thing. But also, they should never have allowed teenagers to take over postcodes. And that is a policing issue.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anyone allowed it. Yeah.
Well, they did. They did actually allow it. They didn't stop it. They didn't go in. They didn't follow the tags. They didn't identify the gang members. They didn't do anything about it because it was too much trouble.
Well, Michael, I just want to go to, because Leroy was shaking his head there, what were you shaking your head at there?
Yeah, same point you were making. No one was allowed these young people to get into the postcodes. What accelerated postcodes was crack cocaine distribution, where young people were being groomed into selling crack cocaine within their neighborhoods. And that's how you started to get the E5s, the E10s, the N1s, whatever it may be. And as a result of that, they started to be glorified in music and the culture and the videos to say it's good to be a thug. You get loads of money, and it was glorified through social media. So, this has been developed. That's from the 90s. And I take the point that police missed a trick over the last 10 to 15 years because of austerity, which has been highlighted, because you don't have those community cops. Like when I was in Hackney, I had my Safer Neighbour teams picking up these trends where young people were getting into postcode differences and the violences and the feuds that developed. And because of the lack of community cops, the void has been filled by this dysfunctional role models, the quartermasters, they call them, to distribute the crack cocaine and the knives and the guns. So I agree to some extent that void has been filled by these dysfunctional role models who've accelerated the number of gangs, especially around these postcodes.
Michael, thank you very much for your insight in that and your call. Thank you as well, of course, to Leroy Logan for joining us. I think I learned something there. I had no idea social media played such a huge part, but I think everybody's in agreement that it's not just going to be one thing that's going to help tackle this issue.